Welcome, everybody, to the March 2019 iteration of AgileTO. I am quite excited about this evening's presentation. We have a couple of our own presenting, and so I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope you guys are as well. Looks like we have a pretty good crowd, so that's always excellent. As always, want to thank Wrangle in a very big way for hosting us as a premier sponsor. We really couldn't do this without Wrangle and the support that they give us with providing this amazing venue, the pizza that you're eating, the beer that you're drinking, our amazing AV guy, Matt, at the back. So if we could have a little round of applause for Wrangle, then. Okay. So a few announcements, as always. Encourage you to subscribe to YouTube, follow us on Twitter, just so that any of the announcements and so forth that happen in between meetups you're privy to. One thing that I will ask, anyone who is involved with a corporation or has an inn at any place that has a big venue, you kind of know how many people we're talking about. Wrangle are renovating over the summer. And so our next couple of meetups, May and July, we don't currently have space for. And so if you know of a location that we could use that would host this number of people, then it would be great if you could let us know about that. So you can either come and talk to me, you can talk to John, any of the other organizers. You can send us an email at contact@agileto.org and just share that information, and we'd be very grateful if you have that info and we can set something up. Agile Drinks coming up on April 11th. This time hosted by Capgemini. Anyone have any more information about that? Are they giving us any freebies or? If I can't hear you, they can't hear you.
So it's the first time we're doing an event with Capgemini, getting to know the community. I don't know if there's any freebies or swag, but I think we'll put out the ask.
Pressure's on now.
Yeah, and it's already full in the wait list, but if you're interested, you can join the wait list, and hopefully we can get you into it.
Thanks, Michael. For those who don't know, Agile Drinks and AgileTO have joined forces, so we're all one happy family. Michael and Trish are on our organizing team for these events, and we tag along for the Agile Drinks as well. So that's working out really well so far. Play for Agile North America in September, so this is a ways off, but these things tend to fill up. Play for Agile is similar to a coach camp. It's an open space, and you will play a lot of games and activities and so forth that will support your Agile practice. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I don't have a URL here, but if you search up Play for Agile North America, you're sure to find it. And I think that's now 3.5 days out in Cornwall. So a really great event that I would recommend. Other announcements.
We're organizing an Agile Games event, one-day event. So if you don't have time for 3.5 days, the other option would be to come mid-June, downtown Toronto. It will be a one-day event. The cost is, actually the details are all there. So if you want, the website is agilegamescanada.com. Thank you.
Says here $50. That's a lot cheaper than Play for Agile as well. AgileTO discount. Hello. Woohoo! I'm signing up for that. Don't tell John. Other announcements. Anything going on in the community that people should be aware of? Any events? Any exciting announcements?
TAC is open space. There's a few more tickets left, so April 13th.
Oh yeah, and Spark the Change is coming up sometime too over the
June 13, 14.
Right. Okay, so what's that? Oh, the GTA Coach Retreat. Is that sold out? I don't know.
April 6th.
April 6th? Okay. So lots of events coming up. Search them up and join up if they meet your learning needs. Okay. So as I mentioned, some familiar faces presenting tonight, and I'll first talk a little bit about Trish. And so I'm sure that many of you know Trish from her very active role in our community. She's at, I have to say RBH, right? And so I guess working with, well, I'll let you read the stuff. Suffice to say that Trish is a very avid participant in the community, doing a lot of work for AgileTO and Agile Drinks, and a lot of outreach into a lot of other aspects of the Agile community, and really just supporting all of us in a whole host of different ways. And so I'm forever grateful for that. And upcoming, she's serving as a tour guide, as it says here, for a bunch of Agile Misfits at Lean Agile Dublin at the end of April. I don't know if that's still an option for people to join up, but it's a, if you feel like a misfit in the community, then maybe it's for you. I don't know.
Perfect.
And John, I've known for many, many years. When did we meet, John? 2001? Maybe before that? Wasn't it at ClearNet? Yeah, so before the turn of the century. No. Neither am I, it turns out. So John is a product owner, as it says here, and has been in that role for quite some time, so does a lot of work with user stories, and like everything else that he does, John likes to do it right, and this is no exception. And part of the reason that I'm very excited about tonight's presentation, I think you'll be very, very pleased with what you see. Back in the early days when I knew John, this is a story I tell people all the time. We would go into meetings, and John would look around the room, count the people at the table, and then write a number on the board, because he knew the average loaded cost of an employee. And he would tally that up and say, this is what we're spending in this meeting. Are we getting our money's worth? And so John has a particular mindset and focus that I've always found to be very compelling. And so hopefully we'll see some of that as we go into our presentation tonight. And with that, I'll hand it over to you guys.
Just going to switch over slides here. Okay, so hi everyone. Just so you know, we're going to spend about 60 minutes doing a presentation, roughly. We'll try and go through some of the basics of stories and story splitting, and then we'll have a quick break, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So if you don't mind maybe holding your questions, you've got some paper so you can make a note of questions you might have, and we'll hopefully have a bit of time for that. And then we're going to do an exercise at the end where we'll apply some of the things we've learned to some real stories, or stories that you'll have access to, and hopefully you'll get to apply some of these things right up. So quick question, who here is in a product owner type of role where you're responsible for prioritizing a backlog? Just a quick show of hands. 5, 6, 7 people, not many. Okay, who here works with user stories, is on a team that consumes user stories? Lots of people, that's good. Who here is responsible for writing user stories? That's pretty good actually, yeah. So it's sort of a trick question, right? Because while the product owner typically writes a user story, everybody's actually responsible for helping split and commit to user stories. So a story is a conversation, an invitation to a conversation for the team. And so a product owner is going to bring up a story, and the whole team's going to agree on the scope and size of a story and agree on a split that makes sense. So really, whoever's involved in the story discussion. So when we talk about user story splitting today, hopefully it's applicable to most people who interact with user stories at one level or another. Even for stakeholders who are working with product owners, having a sense about how you might break down a complex problem and get started is probably, hopefully, pretty useful. So we're kind of assuming everybody here knows a bit about user stories, but just to level set, Trish is going to go for a bit of an overview of some of the key concepts we'll be using today.
Hello, hello. Alrighty. User story basics. This is 101, maybe 102. Anyway, what's a user story? I can see down here. Short, simple description of a feature, as we know. Always told from the perspective of a user or customer. I've seen many that are not, and that's a collaboration tool. It's written out through the life cycle of the product. So we don't write all our user stories up front and deliver because we're not waterfall. I probably can't hear me. We can write user stories right up until the very last sprint or just before the sprint. And last but not least, contains acceptance criteria. So, which is really conditions of satisfaction. Must meet these or else it's not a story. So, anyone familiar with this current format of a user story? Hands up. Alrighty. Oh, lovely. Excellent. So as a user, we have the what, who, and why. Always critical to have that. Who sees this often? All right, just a few. That's good. Okay. I've seen this recently where I am, and leaving out the why having the why in there is very important. It adds a context to the story. Without the why, I'll give you an example here. What we're suggesting is, because a lot of people leave out the why, is to change the user story format and start with the why. So for some reason, as a user, I want some goal. And that way, if we start with that, it'll never be forgotten, ideally. So that would be. So in this case, we have, so I know how much money I have. As a bank holder, I want to view my account. If we don't have the why at the top, we would have, as a bank account holder, I want to view my account. And it really adds context, because this story is the bank holder wants to see their balance. If we're just saying account, it could be one of many things. It could be their account profile, it could be emails within their account, it could be anything. So this adds more context, hence the importance of the why. Second part of a story that's very critical is the acceptance criteria and the scenarios. In going back to this bank account one, we've come up with the following scenarios. First one is to view account balance. We want to view our overdraft account with a negative balance, view our overdraft balance with a positive, overdraft account with a positive balance, and view account balance not available. So that's our acceptance criteria for our user story. Excuse me. Next part of a user story as we get is what makes a good story? Invest. So I'm sure everybody knows this. We are independent, it's negotiable, it's valuable, small, and estimatable, I missed that, estimatable, small, and testable. Without that, we don't have a good story. Right, Ken? Good. Okay. Next one is why small, and John's going to take over.
Yeah, so today we're focused on the small part of invest, and we're kind of assuming that you've got some idea about user story. You've spent a little bit of time thinking about the different scenarios involved in the acceptance criteria. And by the way, I think the reason scenarios were important was just because by grouping acceptance criteria together into the different kind of events that the story has to cope with, you get to think about, what's in the story and how things are going to evolve. So the question is, why do we like small user stories, right? So the common thing is, well, it fits in the sprint. A team can tackle it and finish it before the end of the sprint. That's great, but there's actually quite a few benefits to a small story. Getting something done quickly is invaluable for quite a lot of reasons. So I'll just talk through a few of these. First of all, we're reducing the risk. A smaller story is more easily completed by a team. We're reducing the risk of a large story having a lot of technical complexity and technical conflicts. It allows us to discover and learn. So the smaller story that we have, the quicker we can get something in front of people. We can review it. We can get stakeholder feedback. We can start to understand really what the feature's about. And of course, we're reducing waste. With a small user story, we allow ourselves to sort of stop if we want to. We can get a feature finished. We can start to see how the feature might work. We're also potentially avoiding technical debt. Most technical teams will tell you that when you're building some software, it's usually the second or third time you have a go at it that you actually make a better job. So the nice thing about refactoring and iterating is that you have a chance to improve the quality of that software underneath. And if we have a giant user story, the team's racing to get it done, and they may be building out a bunch of technical debt that's hiding back there. So having the ability for the team to kind of have a second go and then size the next story a bit bigger to kind of refactor some of the things that they've learned about the story is kind of key. We increase flow by having lots of small stories. And typically, even as a great product owner with a brilliant idea, you're going to figure out some things that you didn't know. You'll learn something when you start to see the user story active and on the screen and people interacting with it. So it basically, by making lots of small stories and spacing out the delivery of an epic and maybe delivering several epics at once, you're giving yourself time to learn, and you're giving yourself that space for the team to really tackle the story. The nice thing is as well, I find it builds trust when you're working with stakeholders, because they get to see kind of what it takes to deliver things, and they get to see little features appear one at a time and give their feedback and see their feedback incorporated in the next story, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of benefits for small stories. So let's look at an example of that. So this is a user story map, which we're not going to talk about user story mapping a lot today, but it's basically a layout of a series of components of software. These could represent a story each. And in this case, we've got sort of a typical shopping type of website. Whilst we're building release 1, if we have lots of small stories, we can choose to reprioritize and refactor a lot more quickly. So maybe during our build process, we get information from one of our other properties that paying with reward points is really important to customers. Maybe we find out that the integration or cost of debit card purchases is really high, and because we can cut ourselves off quickly, because we have nice small components that we're delivering over time, you know, we might choose to drop paying with a debit card and prioritize paying with reward points instead, and maybe we put that in release 2, or maybe we don't need it. So, if I have user stories, I have a sense of the story. I've got this bit of an amorphous blob, but I've started to break it down by putting some scenarios on. The question is, how do I split that story up to a nice small component that the team can tackle? So there's a few ways not to do it. If this is our application, most applications are sort of a horizontally layered technical infrastructure. We've got a front end and a database in this case. You do not want to split stories like this. We don't want to spend a lot of time on a technical component and then implement the front end later, or worse, vice versa. While that allows for learning, this technical development can get out of control, of course, and we can end up building lots of things that we don't need. So that's a bad way to do it. Instead, we need to look at our product or the thing we're building as a layer cake that we're going to slice through vertically, and we're going to deliver a nice piece of usable cake when we deliver our stories. So that's a better way to do it. So splitting stories is basically looking for cracks, right? We empower splitting by good acceptance criteria, by thinking through how customers are going to interact and achieve the feature that we're trying to build. And scenarios are a great place to start with those, by grouping acceptance criteria together. It gives us time to think about all the things the story might do. Sometimes just working through a story gives you obvious points where you can say, well, let's drop all those requirements right now. But there are lots of other techniques to help find the split. So there's always more than one way to split a story, or almost always more than one way to split a story. I do 1-week sprints, and people are always surprised that we get several stories in the sprint, and they are all done, right? And that's because the stories are really nice and small. So a story that's been split has some attributes. One of them is that Ideally, the story delivers some kind of demonstrable outcome, something we can actually see or experience. It gives us some time to learn something. It might be a technical learning thing. It might help us figure out what the feature should do or how it should behave, how the user experience should operate, etc. In an ideal world, it helps the team from a technical perspective. So we don't want stories that are split down that seem small but imply that we have to go and build a whole bunch of technical infrastructure to cope with it. So we have to think about the technical aspects of splitting a story. For example, you're not going to build delete before you build create or add, right? So we have to think about things a little bit from a technical perspective. Ideally, a story is shippable. This isn't always possible, and the smaller you make stories, the less likely it is that a story is shippable. But ideally, we want to think about a feature that we could possibly ship whenever we split a story. And we always want to split with the team wherever possible, and the team's going to help us have that conversation about what makes a good split. The team's going to help us figure out from a technical perspective. So a product owner is going to come up with an initial story, but you always want to work with the team to figure out what the right split is. So let's talk about some splitting techniques that we can apply to stories. The first one I want to talk about is workflow. So because this is splitting stories by example, we're going to have an example for each technique. And our example here is that so that I can access my accounts online as a business banking customer, I want to be able to register on the self-service website. So as a first step, like we say, let's think about all the scenarios that might be involved in that. It's probably a complex workflow. Someone's probably sat there somewhere and drawn out a little flow chart of what registration will take and what happens when things fail and that kind of thing. You may think through all of that and you start to think about the scenarios. So I'm obviously going to have to log in as an existing user. I want to attach my account number, my business account, maybe prove account ownership by last balance or some other item of the statement. Might want to prove I'm human. I don't want bots registering, and what else? I probably want think about what happens when my account number is not found or it's invalid. What if the account's locked or disabled in some way, or oh gosh, all right, there's a lot, right? So what do I do? I've got this big complex workflow, and how do I divide that up? So a couple of ideas. Happy path for the win. So often we can look at a workflow and sometimes decide that the happy path through it, if nothing goes wrong, maybe that's small enough that we can implement that first. That doesn't give us a shippable story maybe, but it does give us some functionality that we can look at, and then we can decide which of those steps need to cope with error conditions or problems. Perhaps we have a generic error condition along the way that deals with all the problems. Again, not something that may be the most usable for a customer, but at least it gets our software functioning, and it gives us the opportunity to actually start registering folks in the software and building other stories around it. The other approach is sort of take the simple path and enhance. So sometimes the happy path is too long and you have to simplify it. So what we do is we maybe start with the start and the end of the workflow, for example. We drop away steps that, again, maybe you don't ship without these steps being in place, but things like proving you're human is sort of a value add, right? Until this thing's in front of a customer anyway, I don't really need this, so let's build that sort of simple path first. It allows us to get the product working and enhance afterwards. And so in our example here, maybe we take login with an existing user, and I'm just going to assume they have an existing account. I'm not going to cope with registering a new account and all that kind of thing. Then we're going to attach by account number. We're going to assume that they are the owner of the account. We're not even going to ask them to prove it, which is obviously something we couldn't ship, but it gets it going. We'll have a generic error condition if we can't find the account number in the system, or if we find an account that's not a business account, or any of those things. And then finally, we'll show that landing page with the account attached. So that's perhaps quite a complex flow where we've sort of dropped some steps from it. We've taken the start and the end. We've simplified things down. So this was the story we end up with in this case. So that I can access my accounts online as a business banking customer, I want to be able to attach a business account to my existing user login. So that's sort of a slightly clarified story now, which is great. And I've listed the sort of 4 scenarios that I'm going to cope with in that flow. That's a nice small story that we can get going on, and we've dropped a bunch of scenarios. Any questions about workflow splitting, or that makes sense? One last note about workflow splitting, sorry. Sometimes the unhappy path is a good way to go. So I imagine a complex workflow or a workflow where I have to change a PIN on my credit card or change a password on my account or something. It might be good to start with the unhappy path, which is a button that says, let me change my PIN, and then when I click it, all it shows me is, I'm sorry, you can't change your PIN right now. But what I can do in that opportunity is tell the customer where they can change the PIN, where they could go to get things reset, who they have to call, etc. So in this case, I've sort of skipped the whole workflow. I've just gone with the unhappy path from the outset. And in fact, even in registration flows, a lot of companies do this, right? When they have a brand new product and they're launching, they say, put your email into registrar. You click and it says, we'll let you know when we're live, right? So again, lean thinking and getting something out there. All right, business rule splitting. You're up, Trish.
Alrighty. Another very common way to split stories is using business rules. I think workflow and business rule are the most common ones. So for the business rule, in this case, what we've done, our story is, so if my order is delivered to my home, as an online shopper, I want to be able to check out the items in my shopping basket. So in preparing this, we came up with the following scenarios that we cover this whole story. First scenario is we want a minimum order balance, excuse me. Second, delivery charge, local or outside delivery area. So we want to make sure that we're identifying our whole shipping. Delivery type, we want to be able to standard delivery and express delivery. Unavailable items may be substituted. So in some cases, as you see at the grocery store, if you're buying something, if they don't have that product, they will substitute that for you. And then the last scenario is we are thinking of a maximum order quantity. Quite often, when there's certain sale items, you can only buy a maximum number and potentially some because of the cost to ship, or they want to do a minimum order. So there's, from a business rule perspective, that's what we've identified for this scenario. Okay. Rule guidelines. What you want to do is we want to list all the scenarios, identifying all the potential possible rules so that you can prioritize and determine which ones you'll implement first. Prioritize the most important first. Defer complexity. So ideally, in this case as well, for many stories, you want to get out the most valuable items first. So defer some of the complexity. Learn about the basic rules before getting complicated. So have a good idea. And again, this is a really common and important technique for splitting stories. So for this one, what we've come up with, in order to get our ability to check out, we've determined that for our scenario, we're going to have a minimum order balance. Delivery charge, we're only to deliver locally at this time. At a later date, we'll do outside of a certain radius or however you set that up. And last, our delivery type is standard. It's more complex to potentially, let's say in this case, we might have to use an external delivery service or something outside of our local area, which is more complex to set up and integrate with, so we decided to go with standard first. Okay, and next is John's doing operations.
Okay, so operation splitting. Our example story in this case is one that probably most people are familiar with, Netflix. So I can add and remove viewing profiles for my family. As a Netflix account owner, I want to be able to manage the viewing profiles on my account. So at a high level there, we can see that we want to see a list of profiles for this story. We want to be able to add one, remove one, maybe change the profile or the name of the profile or maybe the picture associated with it. Whenever we see manage, we start thinking about CRUD. So CRUD is create, read, update, and delete, which is sort of the life cycle of any manage type story when we're managing the life cycle of entities. And in our case, create is make a profile, read is show a profile, update a profile, change the name or picture, and delete is remove a profile at some point. So whenever we see a manage type thing, we can start thinking about which of these 4 scenarios we can start with. And typically, you're probably going to start with create or add, right? You can't really read something that isn't there, and you can't really do much about deleting something that isn't there, so add's a good place to start. But other things to think about. So when you start with create and read, probably in a single story to get going, it allows all the other stories to follow. They're typically foundational features, as I mentioned, but maybe reading without adding is possible as well. So if the entity you're managing is outside of your system and is retrieved from a service or somewhere else, then maybe we can just start with read, not worry about adding for quite a while. Maybe things that I'm managing are created outside of my product or service. delete can sometimes take the place of change. So if I'm talking about profiles, it might not be ideal to have to blow away a whole family profile and their viewing list and create another one, but if it's a shopping list and I've got items on a shopping list, then maybe deleting and adding a new one is sufficient and change can follow later. Delete is also fairly important sometimes for the testability of a system though. So if I've got automated acceptance tests that are doing lots of creates throughout the test lifecycle, I might want to be deleting some of those things to clean up after the tests. So sometimes delete is important, but maybe not for the customer. So there's our original story with the manage and all the different scenarios in, and this is what we've managed to pare it down to. So that my family member can have a different list to me. We've sort of focused the why I want a profile. As a Netflix account owner, I want to be able to add a viewing profile for my family member. So the scenario is add profile successfully. I've got a scenario for if there's an error when I'm creating one, and a scenario for adding with an invalid profile name. So now I've got a much more thorough story about adding that's a lot more focused and smaller than the original one. Okay, any questions about that one? Pretty straightforward. Okay, Trish is going to talk about data splitting.
Are we ahead of time? Yeah. Okay. Alrighty, data, the good stuff. Not really. Okay, so for this story we have, whoops. So I can decide what to order for dinner tonight. As a foodie, I want to view menu information. So this is like skip the dishes or something like that. So the scenarios that we came up with for this, our exercise tonight, is view dish name and description. I want to be able to view dish ingredients, view dish nutritional information, and view dishes or pictures of dishes. Why this is data, we say. Reasons for data splitting, again, it allows a team to determine what is essential now, prioritize and deliver other data later or not at all, which is the gist of all of our splitting. Data sources may trigger complex integrations. If we go back to uploading pictures, if we don't have the pictures and we have to source that information, that gets more complex in that sense. If we want to put in nutritional information, if we have to go out, let's say it's legally for nutritional information, you have to get the information from Health Canada, let's say, that is more complex to upload that information. You source the data and upload it. Just examples of that. Data may be messy or unavailable. We all know what lurks in systems on the data level. And data may need to be created by the team. So again, that adds more complexity if we have to create data. Data imports may require transformation or to support complex formats. So if we're getting something from Health Canada or we're uploading pictures, and if it's in a different file format than we're using, that adds we may have to transform that and bring that into our system, so it's a lot more complex. So this data splitting helps us to determine what we're going to build first and what second, third. External dependencies can be complexities in the story. And again, so in this case, what we've done for this story, same story. So I can decide what to order for dinner tonight. As a foodie, I want to view menu information. So to get something quick out there so people can start ordering, all we're going to display is the dish name and description. And because we're selling a very common food, we don't really need the pictures or the nutritional information. Or we could provide a link on the website if you want to add more information. So there's quick things that you can do. So there you go, data. John's on to performance.
Okay, so performance splitting. Sometimes I'll see a story like this, so I can back up my photos. As a photographer, I want to upload my photos to MySpace on the backup side. So when I see stories that are going to deal with sort of volume, network complexity, performance, etc., we can add a lot of complexity to a story and make it difficult to build in a single sprint. So performance can be a series of things, right? Volume, maybe only so many photos at once. It can be limits, only so many photos in total. Maybe I've got limits to my storage. Response time, I may want these photos to upload nice and quickly. That's important to me. Scalability, maybe I'm going to have thousands and thousands of users using this site, and it's got to be able to scale, right? So we're really talking about non-functional requirements, and like I say, these can add a lot of complexity to a story. So how do we split by performance? So really what we think about is deferring performance to some extent. So we can choose to say, I'll build something now and worry about how I'm going to scale it a little bit later. And this might be sort of some throwaway work, but sometimes building something simple and basic and getting a sense for how it performs is going to be really important. Lots of stories suffer from this, depending on how many users I'm going to have in my application, how many different things this application has to do. And if coping with more, maybe the target scalability of my site is going to be complex, maybe this is something I defer. A lot of times as well, I'll architect something and not really know how it's going to perform. So it's good to get started, build something, and actually see what load it can take. I might be surprised. It might work better than I thought. Or maybe the performance issue is in a place I didn't expect. So getting something built has a lot of value. And the other thing to think about is that this allows me to really learn the feature we're going to build before I optimize it. So I might build the thing and kind of realize, this isn't right. I don't want this feature anymore. This doesn't work the way I expected. I want something different. So there's no point in optimizing something before you've really got a sense as to whether it's something you want to build. In other words, don't sell to thousands before you've sold to a few. But bear in mind, when you do defer performance, you might be creating a bunch of technical debt that takes a lot to scale up later. So definitely something to keep an eye on, and something that the team, a technical group, will help you trade off and figure out, is it worth deferring this, or is it worth performing this upgrade to cope with the scalability later? Oftentimes as well, nowadays, with us hosting a lot in the cloud, we can throw hardware at the solution, and so sometimes it's okay if it doesn't work great. We just spin up a few more machines, right? So the story we had was this, and we're going to simplify it to, I want to upload 100 of my photos to my space on the backup site. Typically, you'd probably put constraints in and acceptance criteria, but we've made the story more concise so that the team doesn't have to worry about storing loads of photos right now. We're going to figure out how to store a few, and then we'll scale it up in the next story. Okay, I think I'm talking about interface splitting. So when we're splitting by interface, we need an example. Here's our example. So that I can keep in touch with my advisor as a university student, I want to be able to message them electronically. So a whole bunch of scenarios here about the interface and how it should work, sending simple text message, formatted text messages. I want it to play a little animation sound. And then I've thought about scenarios about where I'm going to experience this, right? I want it on my university app, which everyone has on their phone. I want it on the university website, which a lot of my students use from home. I also want it in the welcome kiosk in the student society, where everyone comes in and uses our kiosk to find out where their classroom is. They also want to be able to message their advisor with their excuse as to why they're not showing up to class today. So that's quite a lot of interface complexity. And I can split this by thinking of a simple interface versus a complex one. Keep it simple, stupid, or keep the interface simple, stupid. So simple presentation means maybe I'm not going to do animations right now. Simple layout means maybe I put all the stuff on one screen for now, and then I'll make the layout a little better, or make a workflow later once I've got things going. Simple controls, maybe I don't have interactive drop-downs or interactive controls that are going to respond to my changing the form as I fill it out. Simple controls can also mean things like no hidden buttons, so it's nice from a usability perspective sometimes when buttons appear when you need them, but that's a complexity that maybe we can defer to later. Simple feedback, so maybe error messages only appear after I've submitted data. I'm not going to have scenarios where dynamic error messages are appearing as I type text. That might be more complex. So I'm thinking of ways to simplify the interface, and I can end up with something really straightforward that gets me started here. I've fixed the advisor in this case, a simple formatting message and a send button, versus, speccing out Gmail in the first story kind of thing, right? So, I mean, those scenarios, like that interface on the right, probably meets all the scenarios I had in mind, but building that in one story is going to be tricky. So, I might also split by interface type. So, for example, I might build the mobile interface before I build the web interface, and then maybe later I'll do the desktop app or the kiosk or whatever else. I might split out resolution and say I'm only going to cope with mobile first website, very simple layout, minimal controls. And later on, I'll take advantage of the larger resolution screens to add more features and controls. I might pick just a single mobile operating system to focus on, because as we know, building these apps in the different platforms all requires a different code set. I might even just focus on a particular browser. So as we know, especially if we're building automated tests, getting them working on, tested on lots of different browsers can be expensive, tricky, and complex. So maybe the team says, well, look, if I can get it all working and tested on, say, Chrome, maybe I can do some Safari next or another one later, right? So picking a particular platform to deploy on is going to simplify my story. And the reason this can be important, these are the desktop browser stats I just grabbed, I guess, last month. So these are worldwide stats. So 71% of people on the planet use Chrome. Good to know, right? Probably worth building for that first. And then Firefox and Safari are after that. So maybe I never really worry about optimizing my interface for IE, for example, which would be great. Please don't. Yeah. And then, but when I moved to the mobile space, the stats changed a bit, right? So the third most popular browser in the mobile space is something called UC Browser, which is a Chinese company owned by Alibaba that makes a mobile browser, and it's really common in China, India, and Indonesia. So in this case, knowing whether I'm going to deploy to the mobile interface or whether I'm building an interface that people are going to use mainly on the desktop is going to inform about what choices I make. So as a product owner, it's kind of useful to know what your target audience is, right? And maybe UC Browser isn't that important to me because, most of my users are in North America, for example. So making decisions about interface can be important, and there's lots of stats out there to help you make those decisions. So there's my giant complex story that I had at the start with all my different interface requirements and scenarios and all my different mobile app and website and kiosks and everything. And to get started, we're going to say that so I can keep in touch with my current advisor. As a university student, I want to be able to message them via the web, so I've focused it to the web interface. And the scenario I picked first is send a simple text message to my current advisor. And I want to send it via the university website, Chrome only. So there we go, nice and targeted and simple, gets me started, and I can defer that interface work for the next sprint and keep layering on top. All right. What else can I do for story splitting? So those are some of the main techniques that you can probably apply, but there's other things to think about. So whenever we're splitting a story, it's nice to think of the simple core. Like, is there a simple core to this story I can get started on? That's really the thrust of a lot of these techniques, and defer some of that complexity. Or maybe I want to tackle the riskiest part of the story first and keep that story really small, but tackle a complex thing and see if I can even do the epic that I want to deliver. We didn't talk a lot about personas, but whenever we have that story we usually tack a persona on the end. And personas are great because they let us think about how the story might be different for the different types of users we have in our system. So sometimes just building the story that's focused to a particular persona is going to make that story much smaller, and then I worry about other users later. So an example might just be like administrator versus operator. An administrator might want to change a whole bunch of stuff, but an operator just needs to be able to see the current stuff. So just getting the current things on the screen and read by an operator delivers value to operators, and the administrator can follow later up with edits, right? As an example. I can sometimes defer external integrations. External integrations do represent complexity. So that might simplify a story, but you got to bear in mind that integrations are difficult, so don't just leave them till the very end, right? We want to integrate regularly, but maybe some integrations are more complex than others. So in some cases, I'm going to choose the simple integration before I tackle the complex one that might deliver a little less value. I can also split on sort of other interface aspects like language usability, accessibility, or design. So sometimes getting a screen ready for lots of different languages is difficult, so I might start off by just supporting one language and then layer on the other languages with future stories. We know that different language and font types can change layouts, etc. Sacrificing some aspects of usability is sometimes worthwhile to get going, to get started, and then layering on improved usability once I actually experience a screen I've built and once I actually start using it, right? then I can say, oh, that's really hard to use, or that's actually not bad to use. Maybe I don't need to make this more usable. Accessibility is and design are all about things like colors and font choices and meeting guidelines and so on. Sometimes I might decide to defer some of those and then follow up and layer that on top as the following story. Again, it doesn't, just because we've split a story and made it small doesn't mean it's going to be shippable. That's a nice to have. But removing complexity so I can break this over sprints is really what I'm going for here, right? And then if all else fails, you can do a spike. So a spike's basically a small experiment. It's an attempt at doing something and getting started. It's a really good thing to do when there's a lot of disagreement among the team or confusion, where people aren't even sure if we can achieve a story. What we really want to do is frame a question that we want the team to answer, tackle it, and then hopefully next sprint we have enough information to make a decision about what that smaller first story is really going to be and if we can achieve it. So this is a climbing piton, it's a spike, whatever. The reason I like the term spike is this spike here, you drive it into a rock and it gives you something to hang on to. So it's a nice metaphor, right? I'm going to drive a spike through the complexity here and decide what it is that I need to answer in order to break that work up and move on to the story next time, right? It's a good idea to try and time box spikes, because otherwise they can just take up the entire sprint. So try and focus the team on what are we going to just answer, right? What experiment are we going to do that solves the problem about knowing what's next? Really what we're often doing with spikes is we're creating a bit of code that we may throw away. We're sacrificing part of our definition of done in a sense, right? We might build a bit of code that we're not going to build tests for or even unit tests for. We're actually just sort of doing an experiment. And if you're sacrificing part of your definition of done, if you don't throw that code away, then I'm left with some risky code. So I got to think about what I'm going to do with that code after. So one pattern we sometimes use is spike and stabilize, right? So I'll build a spike, but I'm committing that if I'm going to do a couple of spikes over a couple of sprints to figure out a story, that I'm going to spend a bit of time at the end stabilizing it in the third or fourth sprint or whatever, and adding the tests and the unit tests and so on that I maybe missed during my experiments. So yeah, that's a spike, and that's sort of a last resort. You want to talk about this? Okay. So this is a great guide that's made by Richard Lawrence from Agile for All. It's got a lot of the ideas we talked about today and a couple more besides. There's a few things on here that maybe I don't always agree with, but it's a great guideline, and it gives you sort of a cheat sheet that you can keep in your back pocket. Lots of people have reblogged this and talked about it, so it's available in a lot of places. Yeah, so that's about it.
When in doubt, Dr. Google, right?
That's
Google's
right.
your friend.
So we're actually quite a bit ahead of schedule. So maybe does anyone have any questions about anything we just presented?
Or would you like to take a break and questions after?
You choose. Break first, questions after, questions first. Question?
Okay, questions.
Okay.
Oh, my feet.
Got one over here first. Do you have a question? Oh, okay.
Hi, John. On one of the slides, you had an acronym OODA. What was that?
Oh, OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. It's the iterations, right? So, try something, look at it, decide whether that's what I wanted to achieve or not, and then I can act on the next story. So the smaller the story, the more I can experiment and learn, right? Without wasting lots of stuff. Because if I build a giant story and a giant feature, then I've committed to the whole thing, whether I like it or not, if I'm doing sprints, right? Sorry, yeah. Another one? I think there's a question.
So my question is, what is your recommended best practice when simplifying or deciding to simplify the process for delivering a product for actual release?
I think that's a trick question. So, do you have an answer? I got a couple of thoughts.
Go.
All right. So, the goal of an Agile team is to always deliver shippable software. But yes, even pushing the software to production in our giant dysfunctional enterprises can take a lot. So I guess I've had a lot of stories in my backlog about let's do the release. Let's push this thing to production. And I track it as a chore story, right? It's delivering value to lots of people depending on what I'm shipping. But ship as often as you can and make that as minimal an effort as you can by automation, right? So yeah, it's you will have stories in your backlog about that. And can you break it up? I don't know. I mean, if you've got a well-designed giant infrastructure in your enterprise and we can all release our little pieces individually, and then we can have a release that we turn on features that enable those things, so product teams are releasing things that are going to integrate later, then it's easy, right? But I know that's not what most people end up having to do. So yeah, sometimes deployments are giant efforts, and breaking them up can be difficult. But I would encourage the teams to raise those issues up so that the architecture of your teams and the architecture of your systems can be changed as a corporation, and you can simplify releases in that sense. The teams I'm working with push releases every 2 or 3 weeks because we push independently of everybody else. And if there's a feature there, we make sure it's hidden behind a feature flag if we need to. We can switch it on any time, that kind of thing. So just one here.
How would you recommend or let's say a scenario where you're building an application that not only is the front end and your own database, but also APIs you have to build that call other APIs? And as a Scrum Master, I've taken an approach of helping the team based on experience on how to do it. But a lot of the bigger reason that I was really curious about the topic and really love the topic today was to validate whether is there something else our team can do to do better, to split better or plan our stories better. So I just want to hear from either some of the specific ways of splitting, or maybe there's a combination of 2 or 3 ways of looking at one story to split, and want to get your thoughts on that.
You seem ready.
Okay, so depending on, like, if you've got external dependencies that are complex, you've got to try and look at what that complexity is. Maybe that initial integration is just really hard to achieve because there's a bunch of blockers or something. Doing a spike in that case to get the integration ready, or something along those lines is a good way to go. Sometimes the integration is complex because of data, so you can use the data technique and say, okay, well, let's just pull what we need back from that external service. Maybe there's a few simple methods that we can leverage, and there's a whole bunch of complex ones that I'll worry about that mess later, right? Maybe one of the methods returns this giant XML document that's going to take us ages to parse because whoever designed that service is insane, or just had completely different ideas about what the service was going to be used for. All these things happen. So yeah, when you've got dependencies like that, if your software has several layers, including an API, then build them all at once. So that's the vertical layer cake thing. Don't slice it out. But when I look at a story or a feature, a big epic, and say, okay, I have to divide this up vertically. Sometimes the front end of that feature and the value it delivers is going to be much smaller because that API piece delivers a bunch of complexity. Might have to refactor a bunch of the services I rely on inside my application to return more data from my database, and I want to make sure those APIs have tests as well, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually literally happened today. Like, I wanted 2 or 3 things displayed on the front end. We ended up simplifying it to one of those 3 things because the service had to change with it. But at least then I see some value. I can demonstrate something. I can show them we're working towards displaying all the things you want. Here's the first one. Get feedback on that, et cetera. And they might go, yeah, that's all I need. Great, thanks. Oh, okay, well, we won't build anymore, right? Lots of questions. One over there, yeah.
Hi. So we'll split our stories, or we'll write our stories. And then when it comes time to test them, the QA will say, oh, it doesn't make sense for me to test that story by itself. So they want to wait until they get maybe 3 stories that are kind of related. Could that be because we're not splitting the stories in the most optimal way?
Could be, but it just sounds like you're building software wrong. So testing and quality
it's not
is
testable. It's
right.
It's
right.
not that it's not testable. It's
So
testable.
then test it.
Yeah,
So
but
yeah, if you're relying on an external group of people to ensure quality in your software,
no, it's an internal team.
So
But
how
they
can
will
you? Okay, so this comes down to
Yeah.
definition of like what
Yeah.
what does it mean to have finished a story in a sprint? And if it means that, well, I think it's kind of working, well, that's cool. Then you're doing it great.
Yeah, okay.
Well, what
But I
else are they?
don't-
What else are they doing though? What else are they doing?
They
That's the
write
question.
their test cases
Yeah.
and they get prepared for testing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Because the idea of small is either so that we can get to done really quickly, right? But
Yeah,
if they're
ideally-
just, if they're stockpiling, then we're not getting to done quick, and then we're potentially we may not meet our sprint goal because we
Right.
might find a bug. And if they're saving it to the last day of, if you're on a 1 week sprint, you know, if they're saving it kind of say, or even 2 week, if you're pushing it out, there's high risk that you won't deliver.
Yeah, done means shippable, right? So if it's not tested, it's not shippable. So why did we finish that feature, right?
Yeah.
And you know, if they're doing fully manual testing in the same group and they just don't want to click a few buttons a few times because they'll have to do it again, it might be a clue that manual testing doesn't work great with iterative development. You need to automate tests, right? So. Okay.
Hi, I'd just like to add to that. If you're splitting as a team, then the team will decide what quality is. So therefore, there should be no reason for them to not want to test it. But my question is, when you're splitting on that vertical layer, I understand that concept, but how do you account for technical debt that will obviously come up when you have, when you're trying to be as simple as possible?
Yeah, you've lost your mic. Well, so technical debt is obviously an issue, and it's going to change the size of your story, so you've got to account for that. I like it when a team says, oh, we can do that, but we've got to do these 12 or 6 or 10 things to clean up the code before we can do it. So let's try and simplify the story so that we get to clean up some of those things, if possible. And then the next story is going to add the next feature, which will clean up the next things, right? Sort of the law of contractors. I tear the drywall down, there's a big mess of stuff, and I was just going to add an outlet. Well, I got to fix the pipes. So some of those things are surprises, and that happens. But I definitely, I typically, I don't know about you, Trish, but part of every sprint is technical debt pay down. So sometimes we'll just choose to tackle that cleanup on its own. And then, yeah, I'm not vertically splitting, but I'm also not committing to deliver a feature that I'm going to demonstrate. So I then have a balance in my sprint of cleaning up mess and delivering features, and we get to see progress, and the stakeholders, we talk about it in the sprint review. We said, hey, we cleaned up some mess, and that will improve performance, and it will let us deliver this thing next sprint. So that's important to you, and we're working towards it, and here's how we did it, right? Again, transparency and build trust.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. I was thinking, you presented a lot of interesting different things, but do you use them sometimes in combination? Like in the sense that, like for example, you might pick an operation and then do it only on Chrome and have a certain performance limit, or like,
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. You definitely can combine all these ideas, and these are just techniques to think about. There's usually one main technique that you're going to take and split a story, because the story lends itself to that technique. So if I've got a complex workflow, let's think about workflow simplification. But yes, I might simplify workflow and just pick one interface to do it on, for sure. Especially, yeah, anything you can use to chip away that story and make it nice and small, the better, right? Trish, do you have a...
Hey, I got a mic.
Oh, not yet.
I wanted to +1 your story, because your question. You didn't give what the context was. Where I work, it is making web pages, and so the way that it's happened is a web page will have multiple components on it. So certainly QA will happen on the individual components, but in terms of something that is useful for the customer, when I first joined this team as a new Scrum Master, I'm like, couldn't we make a page that just has the top component and not the other two? And they're like, no, Chris. And I believe that they were right, but I'd love to hear if maybe you could give either the presenters or anyone else in this room could give me another perspective on that.
Why no? Why?
Because exactly what she had said, it doesn't make sense. And this may be, I didn't come from a web dev background, so I didn't really know enough to know that that was not right. And they say, once you have them all on one page, then they might be interacting with each other. So really, that makes a lot more sense for us.
Yeah, so it sounds a little bit like your suggested split wasn't really delivering a sort of finished feature, maybe.
Mhm.
Like if
I
you're,
think so.
you're sort of horizontally slicing the GUI in that sense, right? You want to sort of say, if there's 4 controls or 10 controls I need on the screen, which ones can I take that still make sense as a feature that can do something for me, right? And so I was doing doing a story recently that you had to select checkboxes to choose what data you wanted to extract in a report, right? And by simplifying and saying, well, there's only going to be one checkbox and we're going to default all the others, that was still a testable feature because it extracted everything whether you liked it or not, right? It wasn't necessarily shippable because people don't want to wait for giant extracts when they only need small extracts. But maybe I could go the other way and just extract a tiny piece, you know, but the controls I choose to split had to make sense for that story every time. Don't be afraid to refactor and throw away part of that GUI the next time around that you deliver a feature. It's okay to build a GUI that you probably know you're not going to go with at the end, right? As long as it's usable and I can interact with it, because maybe I can ship it.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense? But yeah, in terms of manual testing, though, by the way, I've never figured out how an iterative development team can do manual testing. We have weekly sprints. We deliver a feature every week at least. How on earth am I going to retest the entire app and even all the pieces? So building an automated acceptance test as part of that just lets me run it whenever I want. Sorry? I'm sorry, I can't. No, I'm not. No, I just carved a space and said, go away, annoying organization. We're doing it this way, and if you don't like it, fire us. Yes, I'm lucky. I've managed to carve a space. I have a good stakeholder, a good person paying the bills who understands the importance of quality and delivering value quickly. Yes, that's all important, absolutely, yeah. So in that sense, I have a 4-star stakeholder or a 5-star stakeholder.
Hi, John. My question is about performance, and you had your example of deferring performance, especially if you're launching something new and you don't know if you're going to have 1,000 customers. But what about if you have an existing thing that you have customers for, and maybe you're building a feature that is sort of new, like a new API or new service you're calling, and you are concerned about performance? In that case, you just wouldn't defer? Like, I'm just worried that you're deferring too much risk and the whole thing could be wasted.
Yeah, you're right. Deferring performance is pushing down the road risk, but sometimes it lets me get started. Again, I'm not necessarily going to ship with what I build first, but maybe that interface I'm dependent on that I'm worried about performance, I don't really know if it's not going to perform, or maybe because I'm just pulling a few bits from that interface, it's going to be fast enough for us and I need to try that, right? So having something working lets me have an actual data-informed conversation about what performance will be required and whether I need to layer on caching, or because sometimes I can just layer on some caching somewhere. I mean, it's lazy and dangerous, but sometimes it works, right? So I don't know.
How do you think about how many scenarios per story? Because obviously it can change case by case, but I'm just interested in how you look at that.
Definitely 3. No, there's no. You're exactly right. Sometimes it's one scenario with like 82 so the report extract thing I had today, it specified a lot of details about all the fields that were coming back, and that adds, every field that's coming back adds complexity, right? So fewer fields, less complexity, one scenario, you know. And then, but if I've got a nice simple report and I'm just going to extract 3 things, maybe I can have the scenario for the second choice as well, because, so yeah, up to you, but just depends.
Ooh, I have one.
So just a kind of like a weird question here. So is there something as too many acceptance criteria, so like too many scenarios? The reason I'm asking this is that in my team, we have an amazing BA. She actually goes ahead and like writes the whole acceptance criteria, the whole user story and everything, right? But sometimes it's actually kind of long. We're talking about like 25 lines, 30 lines. And this is great for QA, and this is also good for developers, right? But it gets me thinking, is it like too much?
Usually, yeah. I mean, that's... So once you start adding all these scenarios and you start realizing this story is bigger than I thought, and that's the benefit of thinking ahead, right? The business rule stuff is about... Go ahead.
Because quite often you'll see maybe, 3 to 5 acceptance criteria. Once you get longer, then they might think about splitting that out again, splitting that story even further. So.
But that's why the team, I mean, having those acceptance criteria, those scenarios ahead of time is great, right? Because then the team can look at the whole picture that somebody thinks might be required, and you can start asking serious questions do I really need to cope with this scenario? Is this going to happen? Do I really want to deliver this right now, etc.? And that's great, because now you have a good detail. And a lot of these techniques kind of assume you've got some decent story and some decent detail, and that you can start hacking away at it, right? If you've got an amorphous blob of a story that says, I want stuff delivered soon, you know, then how am I going to split that up, right? So yeah, you're in a good place to split.
I think this gentleman here has a question.
The one with the funny hair?
Chris's question kind of sparked a question that I wondered if you would address, which is, often we're dealing with stakeholders or business owners, folks on the business side, who are used to the all or nothing. They're used to the myth of phase 2, and the MVP includes everything. And so when you propose splitting these things up and delivering only a small increment, they get nervous and they push back. How do you deal with that?
Training. So the best thing about lots of small stories delivered in lots of short sprints is that you can build trust, and that breaks that panic and that worry, because they start to see things appearing on a weekly basis if they have time, if you can do weekly sprints, and if they have time to attend the demos.
If you use the user story mapping, they can see the story. They can see what you have your epics along the top, and you can see what that looks like, and the release plan as well. That's a major, a key tool for business. Yep.
Yeah.
And then you grab them.
As a product owner, like, one of the main jobs of a product owner, as I see it, is to kind of make sure that communication is constant, and to make sure that the context is set for every small component. So it's no use having a tiny story and then going, great, did you like that? See you later. You need to say, right, that set us up for this. Now we're going to add this feature. So every sprint review, I always wrap up with a what's coming next, and or every story that's shown, I explain, great, now we've done that. We're actually almost at MVP. We're going to add this one more feature, and we probably could push this out, but that doesn't preclude us adding this, this, and this. And is there any feedback? What else do you think we should add? What else do you think we should do, et cetera, right?
One of the things that's missing at my place right now is that we lack visibility on the boards or walls, and I think that's a really good tool as well, so that you can actually tell that story. So then when John's talking about, we'll build this and we're going to add the next story, they can actually see that, and you can touch and feel it.
Business see no value in story points. So the
No,
value
they're
is
not for the
not
business,
clearly
though.
defined exactly what the value this story holds.
Yeah,
And
so
when
a
teams
well-written
start-
story should hopefully give you a sense of the value of the story, but often if it's broken up quite small, it might not. And so when I'm communicating what the team is committing to this sprint, I will talk about why we're doing this story and what value it has, and where it fits on that radar. That's what I talk about, setting that context.
But this value that we're talking about isn't a story point value, it's a value to the business. So it's a business value.
Just a quantitative measure, because the team actually pull work based on their story points. So that is what the or velocity. So that's what they're saying. So it's a pull model. So the teams are churning up these user stories, but are they actually adding value to the business? That is where I think there is some disconnect. Like exactly what the value of that story of that user story is.
Yeah,
There's
I
no
mean,
value metric
that's
defined in the
pretty much
organizations.
the whole role of the product
Yeah.
owner, is to figure out what
Yeah.
the value is and why we should have that story
Yeah.
at all. Otherwise, don't do it, right? Big value, small effort, do it first. Big value, big effort, maybe I need to do it soon. Lower value, regardless of
There is
effort,
so
don't
much,
do it.
so much emphasis on story points and velocities,
No.
and teams
Yeah.
are getting lost.
Story points are just a way of the team to figure out what they can fit in. And when we say small, it's a way for the team to agree that that is small enough to fit in, that it is representative of a good story, that I can fit a bunch into this sprint. It's nobody else's real business what points you're doing, and if you're doing that, you probably...
But the other thing as well is when you're deciding what the business value is, the business is making that decision as well. So, but you can actually influence that. If things are, like John said, if it's a bigger story, the effort's high, you might negotiate that we'll do that second and do a story that brings value to them. But they should understand that value as well, and we should be working with them.
I've got one question. So you mentioned like we should split the story like vertically instead of front end and back end. This did work in some of my projects, but in some projects we have the developer that just like purely front end and back end developer. So they are not full stack. So in that case, in a practical way, how do you actually like manage the process of the story, like the state of it? do you get assigned to a back end first and then assigned to a front end developer? How does that?
So I guess
factor
ideally
work?
the story talks about the value we're going to deliver and takes into account all of that. And if 2 or 3 people have to work on that story to achieve it, that's okay, right? In fact, insist upon it if you can. Like, more people working on one story, the better your code is. A lot of people are doing mob programming now where the entire thing is built by the entire team all the time. There was a session on that a while. Oh, we didn't do it yet. No, so there's been some sessions on that at TAC and so on. And, you know, mob programming is a way of bringing all that expertise together at one table and progressing through the software. And we know when we've built it, it's pretty good because all of the perspective have been flowed in. It allows people to learn, turns them more into T-shaped people. There's all sorts of benefits. But yeah, several people working on that one story. Don't sacrifice the quality of your story just to fit it with the fact that your team has some experts on it that are required and sometimes not required. I would try not to do that.
Okay, makes sense.
Tom, there's one here.
You mentioned that sometimes if you split the story, you can't have it shippable. And if you have multiple stories that can be shipped, then does that add complexity and risk in itself?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah, so if you have a really small story and you're delivering that feature, you want to make sure that you're using something along the lines of feature tagging so that you can turn off a piece of the software that isn't ready to ship, and then you can ship that software and turn off the. We're doing that all the time. We leave a few, a tab off or a menu option or something like that because it's not ready to use yet. Ideally, those feature tags spread throughout the whole software so that you can actually disable parts of the behavior of services in the back end or whatever, right? But yes, that's a good point. Like, to keep your software shippable, not only does it have to be tested, but it also has to be shippable, which means if you've got a very small feature that you can't possibly ship yet, then you need to be able to switch that off. I mean, that sort of assumes you're a little ways along with your software too. If you're building towards a very lean MVP, which a lot of us end up doing because we're rewriting things that people built 10 years ago and haven't touched since, then you don't have to worry about that so much because you're not shipping every day, so you can get through the epics to a point where you have something shippable. But yeah, there might be stuff left over that you want to turn off so that you can get it in front of customers. Cool. Oh, one more. One more.
What about, okay, I might be being complex here, but what about stories that are fixes, like that have come out? How would you...
Bugs are stories,
Yeah, but would you split them, or would you...
So oftentimes I look at a bug as a spike sometimes because we don't really necessarily know what went wrong. We know the symptoms, but we don't know why. So I'll time box bugs with the team and say, what would it take to look into this so we know what we need to fix next sprint? Obviously, it's an urgent production issue. That's a different scenario. And you may need to just say, well, we're going to stop until we fix that because the lights are off, right? But if, the lights are on and it's just there's a chair out of place kind of thing, well, maybe the chair can stay out of place until I figure out how to get it back into place. Maybe I can turn off a feature that might be problematic right now until I can fix it and switch it back on. I don't know. Yeah, bugs are difficult.
Just don't have bugs.
Rewriting things.
Simple.
Yeah, just don't have bugs. Perfect. Fixed. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do a break.
Yep. And we have
10 minutes.
We'll take a break till
7:40. 10 minutes.
Well, I know my clock's out. I was saying with
7:30.
yours. Time do you have? 7:30. Till 7:40. Yeah.
So we'll be back at 7:40. We'll do a bit
Yeah.
of an exercise and apply some of these ideas to some stories.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, well, I think it's a shared environment.
Right. When you said it, I was like...
pleasant reading. 73 up in the Goodland area, 72 at Garden City, 70 reported by Dodge City and Liberal, 72 over by the good folks of Ponca City, Blackwell area, 68 degrees today. Winds southerly at about 15 with gusts of 25 miles an hour. Barometric pressure 30.00 and is rising. And no precipitation. We're about a half inch behind, correction, half inch ahead for the year, and 1 5300ths behind for the year so far. We'll be looking for a little bit of a change tomorrow, and of course the possibility of some scattered showers. Today, of course, there's nothing showing up on the radar. However, the satellite photo was pretty interesting for the western half of the U.S. Rain showers and thunder showers along that frontal system, and that wide band of fairly heavy snows. Now, what will happen each time that you see the frontal system on there? That begins at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then you'll see the cloud pattern move until 2 o'clock this afternoon. So as of that time, of course, the front was way off in the northwest. Now, however, it's moving into the central part of the nation with a couple of high-pressure cells behind it.
Just so everyone knows, afterwards, after the exercise we're going to do now, we're heading to a bar, and Trish is going to tell you all about it.
I'm not going to a bar. Okay, folks, after tonight, networking at Kelly's Landing. Just a hop, skip, and a jump. No, jump. It's at the corner of Front and York. You can't miss it. And I know everybody's face, so I expect to see you there. If you want to network and talk agile, job opportunities potentially. Okay, let's do the handout. I like to do that. Quiet.
Did you just make that up?
What? No. Didn't you get the emails the last 2 weeks? Oh, I don't drink?
Yeah.
That part of it. That's true. I don't drink.
Okay, we're going to get started, so hands up if you are
Hands up,
listening.
baby,
Please, thank you.
hands up. Okay, our exercise. Can I switch? No. I need to see our instructions. Okay, ideally this will work if you're in groups of 3, 4, or 5. So if you guys want to self-organize, that would be cool. It's broken down into 2 5-minute segments and a 20-minute segment. And the first 5 minutes, everybody at every table, there's 2 stories. And we want everyone to pick one story. Yeah, I want the instructions. I can't remember all of them. There it is. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I have to read the instructions. Okay, so select one of the stories at your table or your group. Discuss your story. Well, read it first and then discuss it. Agree on your high-level scenarios, similar to what we did on the board. So create your scenarios based on the story. And then pick one splitting technique. The next 5-minute round will be to actually do the work. So if you just want to discuss scenarios and then pick a technique. So we're going to give everybody 5 minutes.
Should we leave that up?
Yeah. And then, sorry, just as
yeah,
you
if there's
go,
questions, just put your hand up. We'll come by and.
yeah, if you have questions, everyone's got the splitting sheet at your table, and we're going to keep it up on the screen. So if you have questions, put up your hand, and we'll come around and help. So let's go 5 minutes, then we have one question. Oh, yeah? Okay. So go. The clock is ticking. Always one in every crowd. Why do I have to know them? And I know them. That's the problem.
And then I continue talking.
You think the people you know would be the ones that listen.
Yeah, I know. What were we supposed to do? Were we just supposed to
have
split
your
them?
story.
Yeah.
Think about the scenarios, different types of scenarios based on that story.
Okay. All right. Come up with some scenarios.
And just based on this, and then you don't have to actually start the work now. Just create the scenarios, so discuss, write them down, whatever you said, and then think of a splitting technique based on those scenarios.
Okay. So come up with scenarios
So
first.
you could have a whole bunch of scenarios. Like one would be writing a performance, and then based on that, we can kind of think of one of these that you want to use. Next 5 minutes, you'll actually write the story.
Yeah.
And you can present at the end later.
Okay. Great.
This should be the first line as a user.
I know who I'm targeting. What? Do not. Don't help them because they will need help.
I'm going to get involved and see if it works.
Do
Wrong.
I'm not present. What's the first 5 minutes?
First 5 minutes.
Okay, folks, we have another minute, so you should be nearing identifying your scenarios and then picking a splitting technique. $20 seconds left. Okay, folks, 5 minutes is up. Yeah. Well, you know. Okay, so the next 5 minutes, you can still keep going, so it's not the end of the story at the end of the night. Now you've identified how you're going to split. We want you to discuss the split. And write the story and possibly the scenarios out. So based on that split, what are some of the stories, and identify one or write one story for that split at the least. And that's 5 minutes. Hey, folks, 2 more minutes left. Should be busy writing your story. Okay, 1 more minute, and then we're going to start getting people to present their results. Okay, folks, we are ready to go. Next part is we want some volunteers to tell us which story. I'll put it up on the screen, whichever one we have a volunteer first. Okay. Tell us what technique you used, why, and tell us the story that you wrote.
Which story?
Is it A, B, C, D, or E? We have an E. Here you go.
I want to read this.
Yeah.
I'll read the story so that they can make a purchasing decision that works for them as a mortgage loan officer. Very important person. I want to be able to show the different mortgage product models to my customers. It's all about selling. Okay.
So we split this. So we created a set of scenarios for this first, and then we said which scenarios we want to split out, and we used sort of business rules with like a funny mix of simple, complex, but I would say business rules mostly to split it. So our scenarios were the models themselves needs to be listed, eligibility criteria for them, maybe a functionality to show only the relevant models for this client. Maybe give a comparison view of the different mortgage products, and choosing the interface of maybe mobile or whatever. So we decided to split it, saying that we don't want to do the business rules for show only relevant models. We just want to basically present the products in a comparative fashion. So that's kind of how we made the story very specific, and we said show eligibility criteria as part of the eligibility criteria for all the products, model details, so interest rate, and some other details for the mortgage product. And initially we put in a third scenario there, which is simple, filter some data points, and we decided that another story would be so that they can make a purchasing decision. As a mortgage loan officer, I want to be able to show only relevant models. So we put either a way to derive to that models, or you input filter criteria. And so we moved that scenario to the other story because it just sat better there.
Cool. Is there any way you could have made that smaller?
Perhaps. We could. We could.
Come on, you're a product owner. You're going to build stories. So, yeah, maybe just getting 1 or 2 models on the screen as an initial start, right? But yeah.
Oh,
Very good.
we assumed that data was present, and
That's
it was
good.
just showing the data.
Right, so it's already there, and you
correct.
Just, yeah, very good.
That's why we didn't get there.
Good
Yeah.
constraint, yeah. Anyone else got that story?
So if anyone did the same story, it'd be nice to see a different technique or. No?
Anyone else have E? Nobody else had E. Come on.
Maybe they
you
did
know
or
you
shy.
Only shy people?
Oh, we'll get to that in a minute.
All right.
Anyone else want to? Yeah. Okay. We have a group here. What story do you have?
We chose C.
Okie dokie. Hang on, let me pull
So
this up.
the original story was so that I can further enhance my skill set. As a part-time student, I want to sign up for night classes, and we were thinking about different approaches, and we had a lot of discussion here. And I think, if I understand correctly, we landed upon eventually the simple complex approach. So we started breaking what's entailed in the original story, which is apparently a lot, and we broke it. In our view, it broke down to view. We want to see the courses, select and check out, which would be register. So we wanted to focus on view. We want to, if you want to register later, call the office. That's your own thing. And so we rewrote the story to fit our decision. So the new story would be, I guess, so that I can choose classes. As a part-time student, I want to see the night classes available to me, or available. And now it's only seeing, I don't do anything, I just sign in, I guess, and view the classes. And if I want to register, I call the office.
Cool.
Anyone else did the same story?
Anyone else have a C they want to present? Oh, a C
There we
or
go.
other?
What
C.
did they do wrong?
No, nothing. So
That's great. No, that's
we
great.
had that too, and we went through a bunch of scenarios, and we started talking about ways to filter it, like by program, by is it in class or online, is it like a half credit or full credit, that kind of thing. And so then we split it by just doing one of the filters, so I can see just my available for my program. And then we said in the acceptance criteria, confirm that it's also an existing student that's already registered and has a student number and is already logged in, and so that they can see it for my program. And then I get a notification confirming receipt of the registration, but we haven't built the database that's connected yet, so somebody manually offsite checks to see if there's space available in the program and then replies manually back to the student.
Is that a new hire?
So that's kind of splitting a little bit by the workflow, right? So the registration flow was just say, I'd like to be in the course, but it doesn't tell you you are or not. Right. It just kind of gets back to you later, so you've offlined the second half.
A little bit by the data or the business rules, I guess, if we want to filter by other things. We wanted to filter by other things, we're just only going to filter by program. So future iteration by, okay, type of course, is it online, is it in class?
Yeah, I mean, another way to look at this story is that all the classes are already on the site and everything's great, right? So it's the signing up part I'm focused on, and the workflow split there is ideal for that, for sure. So yeah, I like the offline idea because the steps now for registration are really short. So yeah.
Is
Good-
this another
good
C?
splits.
Yep. Wow.
Hi, we split much like that first group, but we thought it would be really important to get money. So we included payment.
Fancy.
Yeah.
So So part of it was to simplify it, just so that you saw the list of courses and signed up, but all you did was type your name in and put your credit card information, and we already had a payment system, so we didn't have to build that.
So that's great, because you've got the billable information, and then offline you can go charge the credit card, etc., and add them to the course. So similar kind of workflow split as well. That's cool. Very good. Anyone got a different story?
Next. Same story or a different one? B? All right, we'll move on to B then. No, just leave it. B. All right, it's all yours. Do you want me to read the story or you will? Okay.
So that prospective attendees can find my courses. As a gym trainer, I want to my profile to list my upcoming classes and include a detailed page about each. So what we did was we broke this down more or less in a simple complex method, but we see sort of interface variations and maybe variations in data or information that are going to be used. So we broke it down to so that a prospective trainee can find my courses on their mobile phone. Very important because everybody who's a gym rat is putting themselves on Instagram. As a gym trainer, I want a list of my upcoming classes for the next 7 days to display with a date, time, and class description. So we would have the name of the trainer and the classes on a page. Wouldn't necessarily deal with photos or anything or all the links to profiles. Mobile browser, we'd probably use Chrome. Figure that would probably work in Safari as well. And then you would have dates, times, descriptions for the week of March 25th so that you could set a proper date and time and make sure the list was chronologically accurate.
Very cool. So you're constraining the volume and the amount of data basically in that scenario. Yeah. Very cool.
Anyone else have B? It's a bit of a different twist. Yep. Did B?
We did exactly the same.
Okay, so we initially kind of approached it that way, but we ended up doing something slightly different. So we assumed that the gym already had a website, so the profile was already available. We also assumed that the detailed page was also existing. So what we basically did was split it at the end. So we had it so as a perspective, so that prospective attendees can find my courses. As a gym trainer, I want my profile to list my upcoming classes. So the first story would be to actually just have the classes listed out, so like yoga, spinning, etc. The next step, which would be a second story, would be to then hyperlink each of these classes. So it would say yoga, and then it would take, the user would click that hyperlink and then be directed to that existing detailed page. And then if we wanted to add further stories, it could be to either list a calendar on that page or to have dates just listed beside each of the classes. So it would say April 13th yoga, May 24th spinning, for example. And then a fourth story could be to have the page updated to eliminate any classes that had passed. So that would be more relating to the upcoming classes piece of that. So we kind of looked at it, like broke it into basically 4 stories.
So the first one's very simple, where you're just listing the information on the site and there's no other.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Got a whole user story map there. That's pretty good. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
You're hired. When can you
Okay. Anyone else? We've had a couple Bs. Any volunteers for anything else? Another letter? Oh, we have one here.
Shoe story.
Shoes? Oh.
You sure? I don't know who I want to talk. Okay, so I just wanted to preface, this is the first time we've done this.
This is good.
So, thank you. So please be merciful, okay?
Say nothing, John.
Yeah. You can send us emails later, just nothing public. So we found this one was a little bit odd because it's like what I can do, not me for other people, where the other stories seem to be for other people. So I'm a trainer, but it's for the people to come to me and use my facilities or whatever. So we kind of looped in a circle for that for a bit. We did think what we were doing for rules. I'm not sure if we got that way because then we end up with different, yeah, don't read my scribbles. Yeah. Okay, so we kind of changed the first story to, as a shoe shopper, I want to receive emails that will list all of this week's available shoes. And that was like the first thing, period, end of conversation. Then the second one was to set up a schedule. So this one, the first one would be like a manual. You would go in and either you go to a site, now I'm thinking, or you'd go to a site and you would say yes and you would get the list. And then the next one would be set up a schedule so that it would automatically dump into your mailbox the available shoes for the week. And then more complex would be on, was it, on for Saturday, so for Friday 12 p.m. or something, so Saturday morning it would be there.
So that's kind of an interface split in a sense, right? So so instead of putting it on the website,
See what he said.
You're choosing to deliver it in an offline format, which is cool, right?
Yeah, cool.
So
Okay, and then we thought for future iterations we would do things like seasonal. So if it was, the summertime, you'd only get the summer shoes, and then we could further enhance it with color and size. So it was not just what's available for me.
I wrote this story.
Awesome.
Come to, I do it. I get up, I turn on my laptop, and I go.
Trish, tell us all about impulse shopping.
All right. I'll send you pictures of the, I'm embarrassed, boxes. So I think this team did shoes. Now, I just wanted to let you know they're newbies as well. So,
Never
they have
done
a mic,
story splitting.
So you're not alone.
Okay, so we kind of went around in some circles as well. We started out by listing out some scenarios. So for us, it was more the details of this specific scenario. So what are some things that you might want to do? Filtering how you view the information, comparisons between shoes, search for specific types of shoes, store information for where you could go and buy them, metadata for all of your different shoe varieties. So we broke it down initially by interface, so specifically looking at the web rather than just a general, I want to look at shoes. And so the initial story broke down into, so I can impulse shop as a shoe shopper. I want to view the most recent shoe listings on the web for my local area. And then breaking out those scenarios that we talked about into additional future stories. So looking at search or filtering, additional comparisons, and how we can build those in later on. But we didn't have enough time, Trish.
You guys were talking too much. Does that satisfy your impulse, though, to shop by the way you broke down those stories?
That's why I check out every Saturday.
Just checking. All right. Just to answer your story, one other way, if you want to, I'm not sure if you're there on that impulse Saturday, is just drink lots of wine Friday night. You wake up Saturday, oh, God, and then you don't feel good, a little depressed. You buy shoes, you feel a lot better. So.
To be clear,
Works for
she
me.
impulse shops every day, but Saturday is important because she has more time and the new stuff's out.
And it's hangover cure. Nice.
So, do you have any comments for the metadata team?
Yeah, no, that's, so yeah, interface is good, focusing the story to the web. And then what was the other split, really? You were just taking, like, reducing the scenarios, right? Yeah. Simple, complex, yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Once you start listing scenarios, you find very quickly that, oh my gosh, well, this is 82 things I got to build, and I don't need half of this. Let's just leave it for now, right? And that's the sort of the benefit of trying to list out those scenarios early and start to really get some detail into the story, right? And one of the other techniques Shingy was talking about, one of our organizers were talking about is, underlining some of the keywords in the story and discussing what that means, because sometimes that gives you clues about what the scenarios are, and sometimes that gives you clues about where you might split those things and simplify them, etc. Right? Cool. Anyone else got another story?
Any other letters? Any other stories? Same one? Okay. More shoes.
Shoes are
It's
popular.
common.
Okay, so we actually came up with, we got more elaborate at the end and we cut ourselves off. But anyway, we came up with some scenarios that were about interfaces about how you could buy the shoe. So we said you could view it online and buy it online, or you could view it online and go to the store and buy it, or you could be in the store and just scan it and buy it,
Ooh.
right? And then we started to talk about price, being able to see price or seeing comparable shoes or shoes based on color and all this stuff. And then when we talked about it, we keyed on impulse, right? So talking about all the data, like we thought we had interface and we had data, but data doesn't matter when you're impulsive sometimes, right? So, and then the being in the store was probably the most impulsive, but maybe the more complicated
I don't go to stores anymore, so.
Yeah, yeah. No, but I mean, you'd have to, you know, so we made a simple story that was, so I can impulse a shop every Saturday online. As a shoe shopper, I want to view a list of the discounted shoes and buy with one click.
Oh, I like that one.
I just want to point out that this group underlines some of the words.
Brilliant.
Woohoo. We have another table. What, shoes again?
Oh, good, a new story, thank
I'm
God.
not too keen. No. What letter is it?
This is D.
D. All right, I'll let you read that, yeah?
So what we had was so that I can attract candidates as an HR recruiter, I want to manage jobs opportunity postings, right? So we actually started with CRUD, right? Because of the manage piece, right? To actually go ahead with create, read, update, and delete, right? So each one of us actually took like a specific part of it. So do you want to start with?
So I took the create part, and so the first one would be as a HR recruiter, I want to be able to create posting dates on my job postings so that I can distinguish between each posting date. Also, as a HR recruiter, I want to be able to classify my posting by department so that candidates can easily navigate through preferred postings as well. And the last one, as a HR recruiter, I want to be able to attach rec IDs to each posting so that we can manage the changes and identify posting categories through this as well.
So that was all the create stuff, but broken up into smaller. Yeah, that's cool. Right. So create the minimal type of thing, and then very good. Yeah, cool.
Hi. Okay, so I had read, and I'll read two of my reads. So that I can quickly see interest in a position as an HR recruiter, I want to be able to see amount of views on a job posting. And then second one is so that I can see how many people have applied for a position as an HR recruiter. I want to see the number of applicants on a job posting.
From my end, I was talking about the update, right? So in this case, to be honest, I just wrote like one user story, but I started to think about scenarios. So for example, to keep my candidates updated, as an HR recruiter, I want to update jobs opportunity postings, right? So in this case, the scenarios that I was thinking about was, for example, what happens if the deadline date has changed and I need to make an update just on that field. I made a mistake. I need to actually update all the fields. Previous data should be overwritten. That's something that I was actually thinking about. And the last thing was the confirmation pop-up message. For example, if I need to then I started thinking about also button, right? So my message here is that I just wrote one user story, but as I was actually writing more scenarios, I was thinking about, okay, I actually need another one, right?
So there's opportunities to even break that one up, right? Yeah.
So I got delete. So I used one as a HR recruiter. I want to be able to delete expired job postings so that candidates don't see expired posts. And then for acceptance criteria, I want to say delete the job posting that is past deadline date and confirm the deletion. And then for another one, we said as a HR recruiter, I want the system to archive deleted job posting for 7 years so that I can have records to compare. So the system archives confirm delete postings, and systems delete records that are greater or equal to 7 years.
So that's interesting because you've kind of taken a business rule there and said, well, we won't archive with the initial delete, but we'll get delete working so that we can remove stuff from the site. But there's a business rule that we have to keep it, so we'll do that next, right? And what's interesting is so that's a whole user story map too, but we might slice across those stories horizontally, right? We'll do the create the basic maybe, and then we'll do read the basic so we can present the job posting, and now we have something, right? Then we might need change, then we might need another piece of data, et cetera, right? So, very cool. That's
I
great.
think it's well done. Dave, another one?
I think it was probably be our last one, right?
Yep. Okay. We can talk about it at Kelly's Landing if you like.
Yeah.
So who wants to go? Do you want to go? Because you have a D as well?
We'll be quick with this.
And we'll
We
go
chose splitting it by operation, so CRUD, focusing mostly on creating, because you can't do anything unless it's created, and then reading, updating, deleting. And then we also took a look at what are some of the functionalities that would circle that, like looking at the aggregated statistics of all of the job postings, because part of managing is looking at that data and statistics. So that's pretty much it.
Thanks.
Sorry, nope, yeah, one more.
So we have the same story as well. What common finding that I found is that we use CRUD, like create, update, delete, create, read, update, delete. This one is there, but we have, we didn't break down as detailed as the first group. However, we have come up with the interface and the data portion of it. The data being like when you update the resume, the portion of data like experience, skill set, what you have. Yeah, responsibility and requirement as data field that you can populate in, so they can do, being HR, can screen it easier, like, in the text data.
So you pick the key data elements
yes,
of,
exactly.
of create or
Input
update.
your requirement there, right? Your experience and data field, we put that as a portion of the data. And also the other one that we have was the interface. What about the interface that we have? It was the technology, definitely the web interface we want to be applied from the website. So.
I think we're done. We've got hands up over there. Do you have a different story, or you got D as well? Do you have some different approach? Same approach? We'll do this the last one if that's all right, because we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah, pretty much the same CRUD startup. We started with just adding job posting. That was our first user story. But immediately after that, we added automatically updating, sending notification to a pool of candidates that might be available, meeting the criteria for that position.
Okay, thank you very much. So one thing about deleting I meant to mention was somebody mentioned deleting expired job postings, but maybe that's something we can kind of automate, so there's no GUI requirement there, and we'll just have the system pull them down for us, and that might simplify a story, or it might make it more complex if some kind of batch type job running is a complex implementation for the team. So having to make people delete things might be simpler to implement out of the gate, and then go back and automate that later, right? So good stuff, thanks. It's on a different slide deck. So yeah, I think that is it. If anyone has any questions, we will be at the bar. So yeah, that's.
And then our
that's our contact. There we go.
Contact
That's
detail
so
is
if you
there.
have further questions, you can contact us. Yeah.
We're on LinkedIn, so please link up on LinkedIn. All right.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
I
for
hope that was
staying
good, useful.
Thanks so much, guys. Fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed it.